Adrian Hale never went on blind dates. He didn't have to. At 34, he was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country, the kind of man people whispered about when he walked into a room. Newspapers loved to call him the Ice CEO, a name he earned for his sharp decision-making and colder-than-steel boardroom presence. Women admired him from a distance, but few dared approach him. Those who did usually wanted his last name more than his company. And that was exactly why Adrian avoided dating altogether. But tonight, he had agreed to something that felt so out of character it almost made him laugh. A blind date, not for himself, but because his oldest friend, Marcus, wouldn't leave him alone. Just one dinner. Marcus had insisted that morning over coffee. "She's a good person. My girlfriend's best friend. You'll like her. And if you don't, at least you'll have done me a favor." Adrian had sighed, staring into his espresso as though it held the answer to why he was giving in. "One dinner," he had muttered. Now, hours later, Adrian found himself standing in front of La Lumiere, one of the most elegant restaurants in the city. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and car exhaust. Inside, golden chandeliers glowed above white tablecloths, soft jazz hummed from the speakers, and conversations blended into a warm hum. Adrian adjusted his cufflinks, his jaw tight. He reminded himself this wasn't a business deal. There was no contract, no negotiation, just dinner with a stranger. Yet as he stepped inside, he couldn't shake the strange anticipation thrumming in his chest. The woman at the table. She was already there, Isabella Hart. Though Adrian didn't know her name yet, he noticed her instantly the way one notices a spark in the dark. She sat at a small corner table by the window, framed by the city lights outside. Her dress was simple, soft blue, sleeveless, but it suited her in a way that made her look effortlessly graceful. A strand of chestnut brown hair had slipped loose, brushing her cheek as she scanned the menu nervously. Adrian paused, and for the first time in years, something unexplainable caught him off guard. His chest tightened, not with nerves he was used to before a board meeting, but something lighter, sharper. He walked over. "Isabella." His voice was low, steady, the kind that carried authority even when softened. She looked up, and in that moment, Adrian Hale, the man who thought he had seen everything, felt something shift. Her eyes were warm, hazel flecked with gold, and when they met his, it was as if the room faded behind her. "Yes," she said, her lips curving into a nervous smile. "You must be Adrian." He pulled out the chair across from her, nodding once. "I am. Thank you for waiting." She gave a small laugh. "I was starting to think maybe you weren't coming." He studied her a moment, then allowed the faintest smile. "I almost didn't." A conversation that didn't feel forced. Blind dates were supposed to be awkward. At least, that's what Adrian expected. But as the evening unfolded, he found himself interested. Really interested. Isabella wasn't what he imagined. She wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't fishing for details about his wealth or lifestyle. Instead, she asked about his favorite books, about the places he'd traveled to when he was younger, not as a billionaire, but as a man in his 20s backpacking across Europe before building his empire. And she spoke with an openness that surprised him. "I'm a teacher," she explained, sipping her wine. "Literature. High school. Which means I spend most of my days convincing teenagers that Shakespeare isn't boring." Adrian leaned back, intrigued. "And how do you do that?" She smiled, and it wasn't rehearsed. It was the kind of smile that belonged to someone who loved what they did. "I tell them Shakespeare wrote about love, betrayal, jealousy, ambition. All the things they're already living at 16, they just don't realize it yet." He found himself chuckling. Convincing teenagers might be harder than running a billion-dollar company. "Exactly," she teased. For the first time in a long while, Adrian forgot the constant calculation that ran through his mind. With Isabella, he wasn't analyzing, wasn't guarding. He was present, a glimpse of something real. Halfway through dinner, Adrian realized he was staring. Not at her beauty, though she was beautiful, but at the way she leaned forward when she was passionate about a subject, the way her hands moved as she spoke, the way she didn't seem intimidated by him at all. "You don't look like someone who goes on blind dates," he said suddenly. Her brows lifted. "Neither do you." "Touché." She tilted her head. "So why did you agree to this?" He hesitated, his fork pausing over his plate. "A friend asked me to." And you always do what your friends ask. No, he admitted. But I did tonight. Her eyes searched his, curious. For a second, he almost told her the truth, that he had expected this to be another wasted evening, another reminder that genuine connections were rare in his world. But sitting here, he realized he didn't want to speak in past tense. This wasn't wasted, not at all. Instead, he said quietly, I'm glad I did. The unspoken shift. By dessert, the mood between them had changed. It wasn't just polite conversation anymore. It was something heavier, unspoken. Their laughter lingered longer, their silences felt charged. Isabella caught herself looking at him differently. Adrian was intimidating on the surface. The tailored suit, the piercing blue eyes, the calm confidence, but underneath, she sensed layers. He listened when she spoke. Really listened. That wasn't something she found often. And she was beginning to wonder why a man like him was even here, across from someone like her. When the waiter cleared their plates, Adrian glanced at his watch, then back at her. Would you like to take a walk? She hesitated only for a moment before nodding. I'd like that. Under the city lights, they left the restaurant and stepped into the night. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the glow of street lamps. The city buzzed around them, cars passing, distant music, the hum of life continuing, but it felt as though they were in their own quiet world. Adrian walked beside her, his hands in his pockets, his usual guarded silence softened by the night air. You know, Isabella said after a pause, I wasn't sure about tonight. Blind dates aren't really my thing. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. And now, she smiled faintly, her gaze dropping to the wet pavement. Now I'm glad I came. Something inside him tightened. He wanted to say more, to admit the strange pull he felt since the moment he saw her, but for once, words seemed insufficient. So instead, he simply offered his arm. She slipped her hand into it, and it felt natural. A moment that changed everything. They stopped at the edge of the park nearby, where the city skyline stretched above them. The air was cool, the scent of wet grass mingling with the faint perfume she wore. Adrian turned to her, his voice low. Isabella, may I ask you something? She nodded, curious. Do you believe in first impressions? That sometimes, you meet someone, and everything feels different. Her breath caught. She hadn't expected that from him. But she met his eyes, steady and warm. I think sometimes, yes. It feels like fate is trying to tell you something. Adrian's gaze held hers, and in that silent moment, both of them felt it, the shift from two strangers sharing dinner to something that could alter the course of their lives. Neither said the words. They didn't have to, but both knew, as the city glowed around them, that tonight was only the beginning. Adrian Hale was not a man who second-guessed himself. His board trusted his instincts, investors counted on his decisions, and competitors feared his precision. But as he stood in front of his office window the next morning, staring at the skyline with his coffee cooling in his hand, one thought ran through his mind on repeat. Isabella Hart. The name itself made him pause. A teacher. A woman who had nothing to do with his world of contracts, mergers, and billion-dollar deals, yet in a single night she had managed to leave an imprint he couldn't ignore. He had been on plenty of dinners, attended more galas than he could count, and sat across from people who tried to impress him. None had ever made him feel what Isabella had in just a few hours. Seen, human, less like a symbol and more like a man. And that terrified him. A world apart, Isabella's morning looked entirely different. She was back in her classroom, scribbling notes on the whiteboard as her students trickled in with half-asleep expressions. The memory of the previous night lingered, unshakable. Adrian's presence had been magnetic, but it was his sincerity that unsettled her most. She told herself not to overthink it. After all, what could a billionaire CEO possibly want with a high school literature teacher? They came from two different worlds. She graded papers at midnight, he signed deals that shaped industries. Still, when her phone buzzed at lunch and she saw an unfamiliar number with a short message. Dinner again, or maybe coffee this time, her heart skipped in a way that had nothing to do with logic. Second meetings and unspoken fears. Their second meeting wasn't in a restaurant. Adrian suggested something quieter, a small art gallery he supported through his foundation. It was nearly empty when Isabella arrived, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. You came, Adrian said simply, his usual guarded expression softened. She smiled. I was curious. They wandered together, pausing before paintings that spilled color across white walls. He listened as she interpreted the pieces, her teacher's passion spilling out, while he offered stories of the artists he'd met through philanthropy. But beneath the light conversation, Isabella sensed something else, a weight in his gaze, a hesitation in his words. You're holding back, she said suddenly, surprising even herself. Adrian stopped in front of a canvas of stormy seas, his jaw tightening. I don't want you to think I'm someone I'm not. She frowned. What do you mean? My world, he said quietly. It's loud, ruthless. People see me as the billionaire, the CEO, the headline, not Adrian. I don't want that to scare you away. Isabella studied him, her heart pulling. She could see the man behind the armor, the one who laughed softly at her Shakespeare jokes, who asked questions and listened. Then let me decide who you are, she said gently. It was a simple answer, but it settled something deep inside him. The storm that followed. For a few weeks, it was almost easy. Dinners, late-night walks, moments stolen from their very different schedules. Adrian found himself craving the simplicity of her company, the way she grounded him. Isabella discovered layers to him she hadn't expected. His dry humor, his love of old novels, the way he confessed he once dreamed of being a writer before business consumed him. But reality didn't stay silent for long. A single photograph changed everything. One evening, as they left a quiet cafe, a paparazzo caught them, Adrian Hale, the elusive CEO, walking beside a woman no one recognized. By morning, tabloids screamed headlines. Who is the mystery woman on Adrian Hale's arm? The ICE CEO melts, spotted with new flame. Isabella's phone flooded with messages from colleagues and even a few students who had seen the news. Her private life, something she'd fiercely protected, was suddenly public property. When she met Adrian that evening, she was pale, her hands trembling slightly. I can't live like this, she whispered, holding up her phone. I'm just a teacher, Adrian. I didn't sign up to be. Her voice broke. To be a headline. Adrian reached for her hand, his expression tormented. I'll protect you. I swear it. But Isabella shook her head, pulling away. You can't protect me from being dragged into your world. And I don't know if I belong in it. The words cut deeper than he expected. For the first time in years, Adrian felt powerless. The distance. Days turned into weeks. They spoke less. Isabella threw herself into teaching, avoiding the whispers in the staff lounge and the curious looks on the street. Adrian buried himself in work, but every success felt hollow without her presence. He told himself to let her go, that maybe she was right. Their worlds didn't fit, and yet, every night, he found himself staring at his phone, fighting the urge to call. The turning point. It was Marcus, his friend, who finally broke through his stubbornness. You look miserable, Marcus said one evening, dropping into the leather chair across from Adrian's desk. Adrian didn't deny it. You let her go because you were afraid, Marcus continued. But Adrian, you've built empires by taking risks no one else would. Why are you suddenly playing it safe with the one thing that actually matters? The words hit like a punch. For once, Adrian didn't have an answer. That night, he made a decision. A gesture that wasn't for the cameras. It was Friday afternoon when Isabella's students filed into the auditorium for what they thought was a routine assembly. Isabella herself was caught off guard when the principal asked her to step backstage. And then she saw him. Adrian, standing there in a simple suit, no entourage, no cameras, just him. What are you doing here? She whispered, her heart racing. He looked nervous, something she had never seen before. I needed to see you. And I needed you to see me. Not the headlines, not the CEO. Just me. Before she could respond, the principal gently nudged her toward the stage. The curtains parted, and the students erupted into chatter. Adrian stepped forward, his voice steady though his hands trembled slightly. Good afternoon. I know you weren't expecting me, he began, his eyes flicking to Isabella in the wings. I'm here today not as a CEO, but as someone who believes in the power of stories, of education, of teachers who shape lives. Your teacher, Ms. Hart, is one of those people. She reminded me why words matter, why connections matter. He paused, his gaze locking on Isabella. And she reminded me that some risks are worth everything. The room was silent, dozens of students staring wide-eyed. But Isabella's eyes were full of tears. Afterward, when the auditorium emptied, she found him waiting in the quiet hallway. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "Yes, I did," he said simply. "Because I don't care about the noise, Isabella. I care about you. And if you'll have me, I'll spend every day proving that." Her heart clenched. The fear was still there. The publicity, the differences between them, but his sincerity broke through the walls she'd built. Slowly, she stepped closer, her hand finding his. "You already have. The best ending." The weeks that followed weren't magically easy. The media still hovered, whispers still circled. But this time, Isabella wasn't alone in facing them. Adrian shielded her when he could, but more importantly, he stood beside her when he couldn't. Their lives blended. Her classroom filled with flowers he sent anonymously, his late nights softened by phone calls where she read him lines from her favorite plays. And one evening, months later, they found themselves back at the same restaurant where it all began. Adrian raised his glass, his eyes warm. "To blind dates." Isabella laughed softly, clinking her glass against his. "To fate." He reached across the table, his hand closing over hers. For a man who once thought he had everything, Adrian realized the truth at last. Wealth and power were meaningless compared to the woman sitting before him. And as Isabella smiled back, her eyes full of the same quiet certainty, he knew this wasn't just a story of love at first sight. It was the story of forever.